started taking money out of the banks. And doing what? Putting them in money market funds. This new type of savings account. Okay? All right, so the banks, they had this Reg Q, and there was a limit as to how much they could pay. All right, so to make banks more competitive, this law phased out Reg Q and allowed banks to raise the interest rates to a competitive level. All right? That was part of deregulation. This was part of dismantling Glass-Steagall. And not a bad idea here. Not a bad idea. After 60 years, business practices changed, and people learned more about what regs work and what regulations don't work. So it's okay to deregulate or change regulations sometimes. All right, then we had the FDIC Improvement Act of 1991, and you know what FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Okay, you can see the time frame. And this allows the FDIC to borrow money from the Treasury to remain solvent in the event of bank runs. So as I told you, when the FDIC was created back in 1933, they made a promise, but they didn't have the money to back it up. So it took them 60 years, but they finally got the federal Treasury to back them up. They had to change the law to say, if there are runs on banks and you run out of money, FDIC, you can borrow from the Treasury. All right? And again, that's about confidence. That's about confidence. All right. Another thing it does is it tweaks insurance premiums that the FDIC charges. Okay? So that's based on risk. The premiums are now based on risk. So the FDIC goes in and they analyze a loan portfolio and they say, your rates are going to be higher. Okay? And it should be. All premiums should be based on risk. Okay? To a certain extent. Okay? Now part of insurance involves pooling. That's a big part of insurance. We're spreading the risk. So if someone is really unhealthy, let's take health insurance for example, the reason they have health insurance is because on their own, there's no way they can afford to pay for their health care. So what we're doing is spreading it around. But to say that someone who is obese and who smokes and who drinks and who does not exercise, to say they pay the same rate as someone who takes care of themselves, that's not fair either. Okay? So there's some responsibility on both sides. All right. So it defines actions to be taken when banks do not meet capital requirements. So the FDIC goes in, they examine the bank, and they lay out a process. You don't have enough capital. This is what you must do. It's a plan, and everybody knows it. Okay? All right, next, the Regal-Neal and Interstate Bank Law of 1994. Big one. Big one. Interstate Banking Law. Repeal previous laws that prevented federally chartered banks from opening branches or buying banks across state lines. Believe it or not, banks could not operate in multi-state areas unless they got a multi-state charter. They had to get charters in every state they wanted to open up in, and it was really difficult to do that. Okay? So now, if you get a national charter, you could bank. It used to be there were rules that prohibited banks from operating outside of their own county. Okay? So we went from county only to statewide to international during this period of time. And of course that changed everything. You know, in terms of your idea of how to run a bank. What's possible? It changed everything. Okay? Can you imagine being told that you can only sell to this one group? You're manufacturing a product and they say you can only sell in your county. That's kind of crazy, man. So they changed major provisions. All right. So you could create a holding company that could acquire banks anywhere in the U.S. This is why you have to have attorneys that help you, because they understand the laws. You're not good at business, but they tell you what the law says. Okay? No single bank company can control more than 10% of nationwide deposits. They want competition, and that is good. Okay? Or more than 30% of deposits in a single state, unless the state says it's okay. That's important. Okay? That gives them some flexibility. All right. For the first time in U.S. history, American banks could accept deposits and follow their customers across state lines. This was huge. Okay? So this is one of the biggies, one of the big law changes. And it changed banking forever. Well, not forever. Since then. We could go back to that. So at some point, so I don't want to say forever. All right, so how banking was structured. Remember, banking is a private business. It's a private business. All right. Then we have the Financial Services Modernization Act. Okay. Graham Leach of 1999. This is another big one. Okay. Graham Leach. These people, these are senators and congressmen. This happens to be Phil Graham, who's was an economist from Texas. All right. Overturned long-standing provisions of the Glass-Steagall Act and permitted banks to affiliate with insurance companies and securities firms. So here we go. Letting the banks get back into insurance and brokerage, investment business. We can't compete. You're holding down our profitability. We can't innovate. We're not efficient. All these other countries are letting their banks do it. It must be okay. Okay, so first they let them go nationwide and international, and then they said, okay, you can go back into insurance and into the securities business. And I'm watching all along, just shaking my head, saying, here we go again. I hope these people know what they're doing. I hope the regulators know what they're doing. I hope the business owners know what they're doing. All right. So you could have a bank buy insurance companies, or you could have insurance companies buy a bank if you formed a holding company. And the purpose of a holding company, we'll get into that structure, is to separate out the capital. So in other words, if you have a holding company and you own a bank, an insurance company, and a brokerage firm, if the brokerage firm goes bankrupt, that theoretically should not bankrupt the insurance company or the bank. So that's the design. They said, okay, if you want to be in those businesses, you can be in those businesses, but we are going to protect the depositors, and we're going to protect the financial system. And unfortunately, it did not work. All right. When I say security, I don't mean home security. I'm talking about stocks and bonds. All right, so one of the arguments that was made was, if the only business we're in is the lending business, then that increases our risk. If you will enable us to enter into different lines of business, maybe during a period when lending is not good, we might be making money in the insurance business, which actually makes our banks safer. That was the argument. And there's some truth to that. Okay? But that was the argument. All right. Everybody up with me? All right, the Patriot Act of 2001, okay, after 9/11, okay? So this made a series of amendments to the Bank Secrecy Act. It started off to combat money laundering, to keep dirty money out of the system, illegal money. And I'm not talking about counterfeit, I'm talking about money that belongs to criminal organizations and terrorist organizations. Remember, you can't get anything done without money. Okay? If you want to do something, whether it's good or bad, you've got to have money. So when you put a stranglehold on the money, you put a stranglehold on their ability to conduct whatever it is they want to conduct, both good and bad. Okay? So financial service providers have to establish the identity of customers opening new accounts. You got to do your homework, and you have to prove that you're doing your homework. Okay? After 9/11, there was a whole host of law changes and regulation changes all across the economy to try to improve security. Okay? So Donald Trump says, if you're from a Muslim majority country, you're not coming into the United States. And what do the liberals say? Oh, that's hateful. That's based on religion. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's based on security. It's based on security. Okay? Well, Joe's going to open that up, and hopefully we won't get a repeat of what happened in 2001. There were Saudi Arabians who were taking flying lessons around the country, and they were learning how to take off and fly. They were not learning how to land. That's public knowledge. They were not, when it came to that part, they quit the lessons. Good grief. All right. Okay, we have accounts. Okay, so if terms are being changed for the accounts, then the bank has to let the customers know. That cannot be done in the shadows. It's a bad business practice. That's the banks taking advantage of customers. No. All right. Usually accomplished with a driver's license or other acceptable picture ID and obtaining the Social Security number of the customer. Don't get me started about having a valid ID to vote. Every time someone says you need to have a valid ID, the ACLU and the liberals say you're trying to suppress the vote. My response to that is, you bet I am. Yes, I admit I'm trying to suppress the vote. The illegal, fraudulent vote. That's all. Are you asking me, am I trying to keep any qualified person from voting? No! Anybody who would try to discourage someone who's qualified to vote is hateful, sinful, evil, horrible. We've had that in our country, where people were threatened, don't vote. We can't do that. But to require somebody to have an ID, they have to have an ID for everything, but not for voting? Oh, come on, people, we're better than that. All right? All right. So they were telling the banks, you got to know your customer. Don't be doing don't be doing business with terrorists. And I have to do that with my business. Every time I open up an account, there is a database, a government database, that I have to submit the name to, and they tell me if they're on it or not. It's a list of the bad people. Okay, so I have to prove that I submitted their name. Okay, so that we don't have laundering going on. All right. Service providers are required to check the customer's ID. Okay, there you go. As I was saying, I have to do that. All right. You know, a lot of this has to do with how you react. Back during the Iranian crisis, I had to fly somewhere. I was in my late 20s. I had dark skin, black hair, dark eyes. I had been studying for the CPA exam. I had a beard growing, you know, looked kind of scruffy. And I got pulled out of the line and frisked. You know, it was for security. Now, I could have gotten angry about it, but I didn't, because it was right after the Iraq crisis had happened, and I knew they were just doing their job. Now, can that be, can people take advantage of that or take it too far? Yeah, oh yeah. But at that, with regard to that particular situation, I chose not to get angry about it. I felt like, hey, you're doing your job, and I feel safer because of it. Okay, but there's a fine line. You know, you can definitely abuse that system. All right, and we all know where that line is. You know. All right, Sarbanes-Oxley, 2002. Y'all are familiar with this. You accounting managers are familiar with this. The long name is the Public Company Accounting Reform and Investor Protection Act. Woo! All right, that sounds good. Public accounting. It used to be such a great industry. And then they got dirty. They got down and dirty. All right. This law was not aimed specifically at banks. It does affect most businesses in the United States in a good way. Okay? The law was created because of accounting scandals that engulfed companies like Enron, WorldCom, and Tyco. Y'all have heard those names, particularly Enron. Now, everybody's heard of Enron. Okay? I went through all of that. Okay? Let's see. There's a Harvard grad who went to Harvard with Jeff Skilling. Jeff Skilling was the CEO at Enron. And he said Jeff Skilling was the smartest guy at Harvard, in the Harvard MBA program. But Jeff Skilling had no morals. And when you combine intelligence with a lack of a moral code, you end up with like Adolf Hitler. It's dangerous, man. All right. And hopefully if you're at Harding, you came to Harding with a good moral code, and I hope you leave Harding and you're even stronger in your faith. Because your moral code, that's what keeps us together as a country. That's what keeps us together as a community. That's what we owe each other, is integrity and morality and patience and fairness and kindness and respect. That's our moral code. And as Christians, that's our moral code. And if we don't have that, then we end up like Russia. Okay? And we don't want that. We don't want that. But people are at each other's throats. And we're seeing it now. Okay? We've got to be better now. All right, 11 major qualifications. Really important. Oversight of auditors, assuring their independence. Somebody explain to me what happened with Enron. What was the problem? What happened with public accounting that caused this problem? You remember? Have you been told? Okay. Accounting companies have, they were doing two things. Audit and taxes. Okay, that's what they were doing. What they realized is that they got to know their business customers really, really well. They understood the businesses. So they started a third line of business. What is it? Consulting. Consulting. Audit, taxes, consulting. Of the three, which one had the highest profit margins? Consulting. By far. What ended up happening was a firm, an accounting firm, would be doing the audit and then be doing the consulting. And the consulting fee was 10 or 20 or 50 times higher than the audit fee. So an auditor would find something suspicious and go in and talk to the managing partner, and the managing partner would say, turn a blind eye. We're not going to risk $100,000, we're not going to risk $1 million consulting fee by bringing to management the fact that we found something dirty and we're making $100,000 an hour. It was a conflict of interest, and that's what led to Enron and WorldCom and Tyco and a lot of others. The accounting firms got dirty. Okay? Now, they make corporate executives accountable for accurate financials. You bet. If you're the CEO and you're making 300 times what the average employee makes, you better take more responsibility. All right? they require analysts to disclose conflicts of interest. If you own the stock or if you're short a stock, when you go on television and you make a recommendation, you've got to tell people whether you own it or short it. They need to know if you have a financial interest in your own recommendation. And you have to let them know if your firm is doing investment banking. Because if you're an analyst, that's one department, and then there's investment banking, and who makes more money? The investment bankers make huge money by doing deals. So you go to the researcher and you say, you better put out a positive report on this company because we're in the running to get a big investment banking deal from them. And if you put out a negative report, they're going to get angry and we're not going to get the business. So you have to disclose those conflicts. Really important. All right, let's do the FACT Act of 2003. Consumers get a free credit report every 12 months. Okay? And that's important for people who kind of live paycheck to paycheck and who have to borrow money. You need to know what your credit score is. Okay? All right, Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act of 2005. All right. The laws have gotten a little too liberal, and so this law makes it more difficult for consumers to file Chapter 7. What is Chapter 7? That is liquidation. Liquidation. What does liquidation mean? That borrowers who owe money don't have to pay any of it back. That's Chapter 7. What does the chapter mean? It's a chapter of the law. That's what it means. Chapter 7. Then you have Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is not a liquidation, it is a reorganization, which means that you negotiate with your lenders and they have to give you an easier way to pay back. They can't come after your assets. Okay? It's reorganization versus liquidation. So this law made it tougher to go after Chapter 7, to declare Chapter 7, and easier to declare Chapter 13. Okay? Now, borrowers weren't real happy about it because they couldn't get off the hook. You borrowed too much money, you had to pay it back. Okay? But they might give you a lower interest rate and they might give you an extra 5 or 10 years to pay it back. All right. The FDIC Reform Act of 2005, it raised the insurance limit from $100,000 to $250,000, and then it indexed that $250,000 to inflation, so you wouldn't have to come back in every couple of years and raise the limit. All right, we're going to stop it there. So we did 1 through 17. We're not quite as far as I was hoping to get through 25, but so here's what I'm going to do. We'll just do the first homework will be due tonight. Or not tonight, but tomorrow. So the notes are due tonight by midnight through slide 17, and then homework 1 will be due by tomorrow night at midnight. So notes tonight for 17, and homework 1 due by midnight tomorrow night. And we will move on Thursday. Peace out. Shalom. I forgot that we're still filming.